He slid a diamond ring across the marble desk and said, his voice low but firm, "Marry me. Think of it as a contract." Millionaire fell for his contract bride, never knowing she was her sister. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please take a second to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next cinematic drama. You can also watch this on YouTube, Facebook, or TikTok, whichever feels right for you. And now, let us get back to our main character. Rain drummed softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Reed Tech Tower. New York shimmered below, a maze of light and glass. Inside the executive office, Alexander Reed sat perfectly still, the kind of stillness that carried power. Across from him, a young woman clutched her handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her name was Lena Moore, though the papers in front of him called her Alice. Alexander studied her face so familiar it hurt. Same hazel eyes, same quiet tilt of the chin. But there was something softer, warmer. His heart clenched, remembering the woman who had walked out a year ago without a word. He pushed the memory down. This was business. "I will pay off every cent of your mother's hospital bills," he said. "In exchange, you will stand by my side as Mrs. Reed for 6 months. 5 public events. No emotion, no lies, just signatures." Lena's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but her voice caught. The rain outside grew heavier, echoing the pounding in her chest. Her mother's face flashed through her mind, the tubes, the machines, the mounting debt. This was madness. Yet walking away meant losing everything. She finally whispered, "Why me?" Alexander leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Because you remind me of someone who once mattered, and because you have nothing left to lose." The fluorescent light flickered once, like the city itself holding its breath. Lena looked down at the contract, her reflection trembling in the ink. The clauses were clear, emotionless. No affection, no intimacy. Termination at 6 months. Confidentiality absolute. Her fingers brushed the silver pen he had placed before her. It was cold, heavier than it looked, like every decision that had ever changed her life. She closed her eyes, inhaled once, and signed her name. Alexander nodded, businesslike, but something in his jaw softened as he took the papers. "You start tomorrow," he said. Lena rose from her chair, gathering her courage like a coat against the storm. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "What if people ask why I married you?" Alexander's gaze drifted to the rain. "Tell them," he murmured, "you needed saving. That will be close enough to the truth." Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline as she stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut, cutting off the hum of the city. Lena exhaled shakily, unaware that the contract she had just signed would unravel both of their lives and their hearts. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Reed Tech penthouse, brushing against glass walls and polished steel. Lena stood at the edge of the room, clutching the strap of her worn leather purse. She had spent the night awake, replaying every word from that impossible conversation. "Marry me. Think of it as a contract." It still echoed like a dream she could not wake from. Alexander's assistant, a brisk woman in her 40s named Claire, greeted her at the door. "Mr. Reed is in a meeting. He asked me to help you settle in." Her tone was polite, efficient, stripped of curiosity. She led Lena down a long hallway where the floor gleamed like water. Each step made her feel smaller, a misplaced figure in someone else's world. The guest suite looked more like a hotel than a home, white linens, a city view, a bouquet of orchids that probably cost more than her entire month's rent. Claire handed her a folder. "Your schedule, Mrs. Reed. Wardrobe fitting at 10, etiquette session at noon, photos at 3. The car will be waiting downstairs. Mrs. Reed." The title landed heavy in her chest. For a moment, Lena forgot how to breathe. Claire must have noticed because her tone softened. "He can be demanding, but he keeps his word. Just do not let him see you hesitate." When the door closed, silence filled the room. Lena sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Her reflection hovered faintly over the city lights, a stranger wearing borrowed courage. On the nightstand lay the contract, her name printed beside his in black ink. She ran her fingers over the paper, the letters almost unreal. A soft chime broke the stillness. The intercom glowed. "Mrs. Reed," came Alexander's voice, low and steady. "We leave in 30 minutes. Formal attire." Her stomach tightened. "Yes, Mr. Reed," she answered automatically. The line clicked off. In the walk-in closet, racks of designer dresses hung in neat color order. She chose the simplest navy blue, knee-length, sleeves modest. It still felt too expensive. In the mirror, she pinned back her hair, adjusted the neckline, and whispered, "You can do this, Mom. I am doing this for you." Downstairs, Alexander waited by the elevator, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him like it was made for the word power itself. He glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable. "You are on time." "Good." The car ride was silent except for the muted hum of the city. Lena watched the passing streets, the food carts, the students, the joggers, each one a reminder of a life she had stepped out of. When the driver turned toward the courthouse, her pulse quickened. Inside, the ceremony was small, almost sterile, a judge, 2 witnesses, and the sound of rain against the tall windows. Alexander signed his name first with quick precision, then handed her the pen. "Lena," he said quietly, "you understand what this means?" She nodded. "Yes, 6 months." He studied her face for a moment longer, then slipped the ring onto her finger. It gleamed under the fluorescent light, a circle of cold perfection. "Congratulations," the judge said. "You are now legally married." The words felt both real and distant, like a script she had been forced to read. Outside, photographers waited in the drizzle, shouting for them to look this way, that way. Alexander placed a hand lightly on her back and guided her toward the car. His touch was firm, impersonal. When the doors closed, blocking out the noise, he finally spoke. "You handled that well. Remember, the world sees what we show them. From now on, you are Mrs. Reed in every room." Lena turned her gaze to the window. Her reflection blurred against the rain-streaked glass, the city flashing by in shades of gray and silver. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. And though she told herself it was only business, her heart already knew better. The next few days moved with the precision of a business schedule, not a marriage. Lena followed instructions, signed documents, smiled on cue, and learned the rhythm of a life that did not belong to her. Every morning at exactly 7, breakfast was served on the terrace overlooking Central Park. Alexander read the financial news, silent except for the occasional sound of his coffee cup against porcelain. She would sit across from him, pretending to eat, her hands wrapped around a cup that had long gone cold. "Your etiquette coach will arrive at 9, he said one morning without looking up. "There is a company dinner this weekend. You are expected to attend." "Yes, Mr. Reed," she answered, the words automatic now. He looked up from the paper, a faint line between his brows. "You should start calling me Alexander. People will notice if you do not." Her cheeks warmed. "Yes, Alexander." The name felt strange in her mouth, like a language she was still learning. After breakfast, she met with Claire to review the terms of the contract again. Each page was stamped, signed, and dated, as if every breath of this arrangement needed legal proof. Rule number 1. Attend 5 official events as Mrs. Reed. Rule number 2. Maintain public decorum. Rule number 3. No emotional involvement. She could almost hear his voice when she read the last one. No emotional involvement. That was the easiest rule to understand and the hardest to obey. By the 3rd day, the penthouse began to feel like a museum. Every room gleamed, untouched by life. She walked through the hallways in silence, tracing her fingers along the glass walls and thinking of the small apartment she had left behind, the smell of coffee, her mother's laughter, the creak of the old couch. Now she moved like an actress trapped inside someone else's movie. Late one afternoon, as sunlight slanted gold across the skyline, Alexander appeared at her door. "We need to prepare you for Saturday," he said. "It is the annual Reed Tech Charity Gala. Every major investor in the city will be there." "I understand," she said softly. His eyes lingered on her sketchbook lying open on the table. "You draw?" Lena hesitated. It helps me think. Actor. He studied the pencil, lines, faces, gestures, moments of quiet humanity, and something flickered in his expression, gone before she could name it. Keep that, he said finally. Just make sure no one else sees it. Privacy matters. That night, the city hummed below as she stood by the window, holding the contract in her hands. It was only paper, yet it felt heavier than iron. Her name, his name, side by side. It was a promise without warmth, an alliance built on debt and silence. But as she looked out at the glittering skyline, she whispered to herself, 6 months. I can survive 6 months. Down the hall, Alexander poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the light. He told himself this was all strategy, a way to steady his reputation after the scandal that had followed Alice's disappearance. But when he pictured Lena's uncertain smile, the way she said his name like she was afraid of breaking it, something in him shifted. He pushed the thought away. The next morning came with a storm. Rain lashed the glass walls, thunder rolling over the city. Lena's wardrobe fitting had begun early, stylists moving around her like a silent army. Fabric rustled, zippers hissed, and mirrors reflected her from every angle. When Alexander entered, conversation stopped. He stood at the doorway, watching as she turned in a navy evening gown that caught the light like liquid metal. "Do I look convincing enough?" she asked, forcing a smile. He paused, eyes softening for the first time. More than convincing. The room went still. For a heartbeat, the world outside ceased to exist. Then he turned away, voice steady again. "We leave at 7. Do not be late." When he left, Lena exhaled shakily, her pulse unsteady. She told herself it was only nerves. But deep down, she knew the line between duty and desire had already begun to blur. The night of the charity gala arrived with the kind of rain that made the streets shimmer like glass. Reed Tech banners fluttered outside the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Hotel, and cameras flashed as black cars pulled up one by one. Inside, music floated through the air, violins, crystal glasses, polite laughter that sounded rehearsed. Lena stood near the entrance, her fingers brushing the edge of her clutch, every nerve alive with tension. The navy gown fit her perfectly, but she felt like she was wearing someone else's skin. The moment Alexander appeared beside her, conversations paused. Heads turned. His hand rested lightly on her back, the gesture practiced, professional. "Ready?" he murmured. She nodded, forcing a smile. "I think so." They stepped into the light together. The crowd closed in. Immediately, investors, journalists, socialites with champagne smiles. Lena had been coached for this moment. Graceful posture, polite laughter, limited words. But no one had told her how to quiet the pounding of her heart. "Mr. Reed, what a surprise," a man greeted, shaking Alexander's hand. "And this must be your wife. We have heard so much about her." Lena extended her hand, steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "It is lovely to meet you." The man's eyes lingered longer than they should have. "You look very different from the photos I remember," he said casually. "But I suppose marriage changes everyone." Her smile held, but her stomach tightened. Alexander's tone stayed even. "New lighting, perhaps." The man chuckled and walked away, leaving Lena's pulse racing. For the next hour, she followed Alexander's lead, answering small talk with warmth that surprised even her. She noticed how easily people bent toward him, how power made conversation flow smoother. Yet what struck her most was how lonely he looked when the attention faded, his smile brief, his gaze distant, as if the entire room were made of glass he could see through but never touch. During the charity auction, Lena sat beside him as the host introduced the evening's highlight, a scholarship fund for underprivileged students. She leaned closer, whispering, "This was your idea?" He hesitated before answering. "Alice started it," he said softly. "I just kept it running." Lena looked at him, realizing for the first time that beneath the tailored suits and confidence, there was a man haunted by a ghost. She wanted to speak, to tell him she was not that woman, but the words caught in her throat. When the auction ended, Alexander excused himself to speak with a board member, leaving her momentarily alone. A reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Mrs. Reed, one question, what inspired you to support tonight's cause?" Lena blinked, caught off guard. "Because every child deserves a chance," she said quickly. "And sometimes, one act of kindness can change a life." The reporter smiled. "Beautifully said." Alexander returned just in time to hear the tail end of her answer. Later in the car, he broke the silence. "You did well tonight. I just said what felt true," she replied. He glanced at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "That was not part of the script, but it worked. People believed you." Lena looked out the window at the rain sliding down the glass. "I was not trying to make them believe. I was just speaking honestly." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city lights passed in streaks of gold and silver. Then, unexpectedly, Alexander laughed quietly, a sound so rare it startled her. "You are full of surprises, Mrs. Reed." When the car pulled into the underground garage, he turned to her. "Thank you," he said simply. She hesitated. "For what?" "For reminding me what sincerity sounds like." That night, as Lena removed her jewelry in front of the mirror, her reflection looked different. Not because of the gown or the makeup, but because she felt the smallest spark of truth beneath the performance. She touched the ring on her finger and whispered, "It was supposed to be a lie." Yet in her heart, the lie was already becoming something dangerously close to real. The following morning carried a strange calm, as if the city itself had paused to breathe. Sunlight spilled across the terrace where Lena sat, still replaying the moments from the gala. For the first time, she had seen Alexander not as the man who owned skyscrapers, but as someone who carried loneliness like an invisible weight. That realization frightened her more than she wanted to admit. When he appeared with 2 cups of coffee, she almost did not recognize the gesture. "You were impressive last night," he said, setting a cup beside her. "Investors keep asking about you. They think you are the reason the charity fund reached double its target." Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe they just liked the story. Maybe they liked you," he said without looking up. The words hung between them, soft but heavy. She watched him for a long moment, the careful posture, the sharp suit, the trace of weariness around his eyes. Beneath all the control, there was a man who once believed in something real. Over the next few weeks, they moved through the contract as if it were routine, yet something subtle kept changing. Alexander began to include her in meetings. He asked her opinion about foundation projects. When she spoke, he listened. She found herself laughing at his dry humor, surprised that he even had one. One evening, as they reviewed documents in his office, Lena noticed the clock on the wall. "It is almost midnight. You should rest." He kept typing. "I have work to finish." She hesitated. "You cannot buy back time, Alexander." He looked up sharply, as if the sentence had struck deeper than intended. "I lost time once," he said quietly. "Now I do not waste it." She wanted to ask what he meant, but the pain in his eyes told her enough. Instead, she reached for her sketchbook and flipped to a page she had been hiding. "Here," she said, sliding it toward him. "I drew this after the gala." It was his portrait, not perfect, but honest, his guarded expression, his hand resting near his watch, the faint exhaustion behind his calm. He studied it in silence. "You see too much," he finally said. "I see what you try to hide," she answered. That night, something shifted. The distance between them began to feel less like safety and more like denial. A week later, the first public test of their marriage arrived. The Reed Tech Board had arranged a press dinner to celebrate a new partnership. Photographers lined the entrance, flashes bursting as the couple stepped from the car. Alexander's hand found hers, and for the first time it was not just for show. Inside, the room glittered with silverware and conversation. When a reporter joked about how Mrs. Reed has tamed the city's most untouchable CEO, Alexander smiled in a way that startled even her. "Maybe she has," he said, his tone gentle but sincere. During the meal, one of the directors turned to Lena. "So tell us, Mrs. Reed, how does it feel to marry into an empire?" Lena answered calmly, "Empires are only as strong as the people who build them together." The table went quiet for a second, then laughter followed, genuine and warm. Alexander leaned closer, his voice low. "You are better at this than I am. Maybe because I do not see this as pretending anymore," she whispered. He met her eyes, and for the first time, there was no mask between them. Later that night, after the guests left, they stood alone on the balcony overlooking the river. The city lights shimmered below, reflected in the water like 1,000 tiny promises. He handed her a glass of wine and said, "For someone who agreed to 6 months, you have changed everything in 2. Lena smiled, her heart unsteady. Maybe it is not about time. Maybe it is about truth. The wind carried her words into the night. Somewhere deep inside, both of them knew that whatever they were building had already crossed the line from fake to real. If this fake marriage universe pulls you in, subscribe now so you never miss the next chapter. Autumn came quietly, softening the edges of the city with gold and gray. 2 months had passed since the contract began, yet the lines between duty and something far deeper had blurred beyond recognition. The tabloids called them the couple that saved Reed Tech's image, but behind closed doors, the story was different, more fragile, more human. Lena spent her mornings sketching by the terrace, her evenings attending events she once watched on television. What surprised her most was not the luxury, but the quiet moments between the shared silence, the almost smiles, the accidental warmth of a hand brushing hers in the car. One late evening, a storm rolled over Manhattan, thunder rumbling like a distant warning. Alexander stood by the window of his study, his reflection lit by flashes of lightning. He had not spoken much that day. When Lena entered with a cup of tea, he turned toward her slowly. "You should be asleep," he said. "So should you," she replied gently, setting the cup on his desk. "You work as if rest were a weakness." He gave a faint smile, tired and unguarded. "When I stop, the memories get louder." She hesitated. "Memories of her?" He looked at her, surprised that she dared to ask. "Alice," he said finally, his voice low. "She left without a word. One morning she was gone, and with her went everything I thought I understood about loyalty." Lena's throat tightened. She had known this moment would come, the shadow of her sister's name, standing between them like glass. But hearing the grief in his voice felt heavier than she imagined. "She was not the only one who left you," Lena said softly. "Maybe you left parts of yourself with her." For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm outside filled the silence. Then he said, "And what about you, Lena? What did you leave behind to be here?" "My peace," she answered truthfully. "But I am starting to find pieces of it again." He stared at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "You should not make this personal," he warned. "You know what this arrangement is." "I know," she said, "but you cannot control what feels real." The air thickened with emotion neither of them could name. When a bolt of lightning illuminated the room, he reached for her hand, hesitant, unsure. She did not pull away. For the first time, there were no rules, no cameras, no scripts, only the truth neither of them had planned for. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the glass walls as if nothing had happened. Yet everything had changed. Over breakfast, the silence was different, gentler, charged with unspoken meaning. Alexander glanced at her once, then again, as if confirming something he could not admit. By afternoon, the news outlets had begun speculating about their unusual chemistry. Photos from the press dinner spread online, his hand brushing hers, their smiles too genuine for performance. Claire entered the office carrying a stack of newspapers. "The board wants to discuss your relationship image," she said carefully. Alexander frowned. "Image?" "They think the marriage may have become real," she replied. He dismissed the papers, but Lena could see the tension in his shoulders. Later that night, when she found him pacing the balcony, she said quietly, "They are not wrong, are they?" He turned to face her. "If it were real, would that ruin everything or fix it?" She took a slow breath. "Maybe it would fix us." He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Then tell me how to stop pretending." The words were almost a confession, carried away by the night wind. For the first time since the contract began, Lena saw the man behind the mask, the one who could love, the one who could break. Inside, the city lights shimmered across their reflection on the glass. They stood inches apart, the world outside unaware that a lie had finally turned into something real and that truth was about to cost them both everything. The next morning began like any other, until the elevator doors opened and the past walked in. Alice stood there, her twin sister, alive, flawless, and smiling like a ghost that had learned how to pretend. The resemblance froze Alexander where he stood, the color drained from his face. "Hello, Alex," Alice said softly, her tone smooth, confident. "I heard you got married." Imagine my surprise. Lena's breath caught. Every sound in the room vanished except for her sister's voice. She wanted to speak, to explain, but no words came. Alexander's gaze darted between them, disbelief hardening into anger. "You both of you, what is this?" Alice stepped closer, a cruel glint in her eyes. "You married her thinking she was me, did you not? That must have been fun to watch." Lena shook her head, panic rising. "That is not true. She was gone and I—" "Stop!" Alexander cut her off, his voice sharp. "You lied to me. Every moment, every word you were pretending. It was never meant to be a lie," Lena pleaded. "I signed that contract to save my mother. I did not plan to fall in love with you." The silence that followed was unbearable. Outside, the city thundered on, uncaring. Alexander looked at her as if she were a stranger. "Love?" he repeated bitterly. "You do not get to use that word." Alice smiled faintly, satisfied with the chaos she had unleashed. "You see, Alex? You always fall for illusions." He turned away, his voice flat. "The contract ends today. You can both leave." Lena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The walls of the penthouse seemed to close in, the glass turning into mirrors that reflected her guilt. She reached for him, but he stepped back. "Please, listen. There is nothing left to listen to," he said coldly. "You wanted a deal. Now it is done." Her heart cracked with the weight of everything unsaid. She watched him walk away, each step deliberate, final. The elevator doors closed behind him, and the sound echoed like a verdict. Alice lingered for a moment, her smirk fading when she saw the tears her sister could not hide. "You were never meant for this world, Lena," she said quietly. "You never should have tried to live my life." When she was gone, Lena stood alone, surrounded by silence and the faint scent of the perfume her sister used to wear. She looked down at the ring still shining on her finger and whispered, "It was never fake for me." Outside, the rain began again, soft but relentless, like a city mourning something that had almost become real. Days passed, but to Lena, time no longer felt real. The penthouse that once shimmered with city light had turned into an empty cage of glass and echoes. Alexander had vanished from her life as quickly as he had entered it. No calls, no visits, not even a line from his assistant. The papers arrived quietly in an envelope. Termination of contract, effective immediately. It was as if 6 months of her life had been erased with a signature. She left the apartment before sunrise, carrying only her sketchbook and a suitcase. For weeks, she wandered through small art galleries and coffee shops, drawing to keep herself from collapsing. But every page she filled carried traces of him, his outline, his silence, the way his voice softened when he forgot to guard himself. One afternoon, as she cleaned a paintbrush in a studio where she now volunteered, the television above the counter played the Reed Tech charity auction live. Alexander stood behind a podium, addressing a crowd of reporters. His words were calm, rehearsed. "Reed Tech remains committed to the foundation my late fiancé started. Tonight's event honors those who turn pain into purpose." Late fiancé. The words hit like a knife. He had rewritten the story again, sealing her out of his world completely. But then, as the camera panned across the hall, Lena saw something that made her heart stutter her painting, the sketch she had left behind months ago, now framed at the center of the exhibition wall. Beneath it read the title she had written in pencil, "The Real Promise." The next morning, reporters began calling her name. "Lena Moore, is it true you are the artist behind The Real Promise? Will you attend tonight's gala?" She tried to avoid the W. Attention, but an email arrived from the foundation's new curator. "Your work deserves to be seen. The proceeds will fund kidney patients your cause." That night, wearing a simple ivory dress. She walked back into the same ballroom where it had all begun. Cameras flashed, whispers followed, but she kept her eyes steady. When Alexander took the stage and saw her standing in the crowd, his voice faltered. The room seemed to hold its breath. He stepped down from the podium, crossing the distance between them as people watched in stunned silence. "You should have told me," he said quietly, his voice raw. "I tried," she answered. "You never wanted to hear the truth." He looked at her for a long moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document, the original contract, creased and worn. Without another word, he tore it in half, the sound cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "This was never about rules," he said, his voice steady now. "It was about fear, and I am done being afraid." Applause rippled through the room as he extended his hand to her. For the first time, Lena saw not the billionaire, not the contract, but the man she had fallen in love with. When she took his hand, the cameras flashed like thunder, capturing the moment two broken hearts chose truth over pride. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights glowed warm against the night sky, as if the world itself was giving them permission to begin again. A full year passed before the world heard from them again. The tabloids had stopped speculating, the cameras had moved on, and ReadTech had quietly shifted its focus toward philanthropy instead of power. Somewhere on the Upper West Side, in a renovated art gallery filled with soft light and quiet music, an exhibition opened under a single name, Lena Reed. The first piece that greeted visitors was a familiar sketch, framed in white oak, The Real Promise. Next to it hung new canvases, each one telling a story of redemption, loss, and love that did not need perfection to be real. Near the center of the gallery stood a small plaque that read, "Dedicated to those who found truth in the wrong place and love in the right moment." As guests filled the room, Alexander appeared beside her. No cameras, no speeches, just a man who had learned to live honestly. His gray suit was simple, his smile quiet. He held out a small velvet box and said, "Last time I gave you a contract. Tonight I want to give you something real." Inside was a silver watch, the same one that had once stopped at 2:17 the night Alice left him. Now it ticked steadily, the second hand alive again. "It started working the day you walked back into that ballroom," he said. Lena's eyes shimmered as she whispered, "You fixed it." He shook his head gently. "No, you did." When he placed the watch in her hand, the crowd around them seemed to fade. He knelt, not with grand gestures or rehearsed words, but with a simple truth. "Marry me, without contracts, without fear, just love, this time for real." Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, always yes." Applause broke softly through the gallery as Alexander rose, pulling her close. The city lights from the wide windows painted them in gold. Outside, New York pulsed with life, and for once, neither of them felt small within it. Later that night, as the guests left and the gallery quieted, Lena traced her fingers over the framed pieces on the wall. Each one marked a chapter of their story, a story born from lies, saved by honesty, and sealed with faith. Alexander slipped his arm around her waist, resting his forehead against hers. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" he asked. She smiled. "Every day, but I would not change a thing." He looked at her, eyes full of the peace he had spent years searching for. "Then maybe the best mistakes are the ones that lead us home." Outside, the first snow began to fall, soft and slow, covering the city in white. The gallery lights dimmed, leaving only the glow of The Real Promise in the window, a reminder that some contracts are meant to end so real love can begin. If you want more Untold Billionaire love, subscribe and choose your next chapter on screen.